And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today across the Louisiana plain, where we are rapidly approaching the 100th episode, advancing the cause of constitutional conservatism across the state, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom, brought to you by freedom-loving Louisiana First Patriots. Hello, State of Freedom warriors. Thank you for inviting us to be part of your day today. We're so grateful for you. You're the best listening family we could possibly hope for, and we're only here because of your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. If you are looking for a way to support us, to advertise with us, or to send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. We'd also really appreciate it if you'd help us get the word out and spread the reach of the State of Freedom. Please like the show on whatever platform you listen to us, subscribe to it, share it. You can share short clips, as you know, rather than the full episodes from our YouTube and Rumble channels, and the links to those are always in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us. Well, today we have an absolute treat for you. Joining us is a patriot, a veteran, a longtime public servant, and a tried and true conservative, Louisiana's Treasurer-elect John Fleming. Before we meet John, let me read the scripture of the day. Today is Psalm chapter 4, verses 3 through 5, and it says, "May we never forget that the Lord works wonders for every one of his devoted lovers, and this is how I know that he will answer my every prayer. Tremble in awe before the Lord and do not sin against him. Be still upon your bed and search your heart before him. Bring to the Lord the sacrifice of righteousness and put your trust in him." And this passage was really an admonition to me this morning to keep my heart pure before the Lord. The Lord's asked us to be faithful and pure in the little things, and we know that he is faithful in all things. And these verses reminded me this morning that sin we haven't dealt with through repentance serves as a wall between us and the Lord. And we're the ones who have the power to tear down that wall. It's with humility and faith that we do that, by keeping our hearts clean, through inviting Holy Spirit to examine us and shine a light on what's out of order. So let me encourage you today, invite Holy Spirit to come and do that with you so you can live in freedom and live in the fullness of what Jesus' sacrifice accomplished for you. We have so much work to do. We don't have time to be held hostage by our own failings.
Absolutely not. And the importance of examining our own motives, why we do what we do, and to make sure that we're doing them not for our own glory, but for the glory of God and for the betterment of our fellow citizens. Speaking of whom, as you said, John Fleming, our guest today, Danielle, has been involved in bettering our community and bettering the state for many, many years. A former U.S. Congressman from the 4th District, former Trump advisor, and as you said, newly elected state treasurer. What a pleasure to have you with us today, John. How are you?
Chris, Danielle, I'm doing great, and thank you so much. And also thank you for the quotes from Psalms. It reminds us that God has a grand plan for all of us, for really humanity, but also has a specific plan for each and every one of us individually. And that we often struggle between our own wants, desires, our own plans, and those of His. And we, as Christians at least, should always seek to find the way that God has selected for us to live out our lives in the best way possible in the service of the Lord.
Yes, that's so well said, John. And we always have a tendency, the natural tendency of man is to sort of become selfish and to advance ourselves and enact our own agenda rather than seeking the kingdom of God and his will. So, and he does have an individual plan for each of us. And there are a lot of people in the world who have forgotten that God created them and has a plan for them. So I would pray that people would prayerfully discern what God's will is for them each day.
Yeah, and it's for good, not for harm, right? It's not something that's so terrible and awful that we wouldn't want to participate in it. It's actually something tailor-made for us because he knows us, because he made us. So I think that's something to keep in mind. God's will is not something awful and out there that would be the best thing to do, but feel the worst or cause us the most, something we just wouldn't like. It'll actually be something we take great joy in and can thrive in.
And I think that that's so true, the true words. And I think I'm correct in saying this, that God will oftentimes use imperfect people, we're all imperfect, to do very good things, but he won't use good people to do bad things. And so it's important that we do keep our hearts pure.
Yes, and he often it seems to be sort of a pattern of God that he in fact chooses the imperfect to accomplish his great objectives because it gives him the greater glory. John, talk about at the outset, because you haven't been a guest on the show before, talk about your background, your political and personal background, because it's so interesting, and then leading up to your decision to run for treasurer.
Well, Chris, thanks for that. And so a lot of people know, because I do enter this into my discussions with folks, because I do think it's important for people to know who I am at my core. And that is that I grew up in a working class home, and my dad died when I was still in high school. My mother was disabled. I had a little brother and sister. So I knew what it was like to struggle. Now, we weren't poor, but we were of low means. We weren't members of the country club. We didn't live on the right side of town, but we had everything that we needed. But we did struggle financially, and I was ready to go off to college, and God provided for me by finding a way for me to have extra work, to borrow money, have some scholarships, and I worked my way through college with His help. And then finishing college, I went on to medical school, found a way to finance that. And so as a result, I was able to fulfill my dream since age 10 to one day become a physician. And I've loved being a doctor. I've been a doctor for many years, still have a medical practice, and still practice from time to time. But I became interested in entrepreneurship, and I opened my own business back in 1985 that has flourished since then. And so I've been involved in franchising, retail, and certainly real estate for a number of years. And God has blessed my family with business ownership. But I've had good times and not so good times with that. And again, learned a lot in that process. So in 2008, I had the opportunity to run for Congress, and I had been concerned about the direction of our country. To be honest with you, I'm more concerned today than even then, because many things have happened since then. So I served 8 years in Congress and fought against many of the things that have now evolved culturally into problematic things that we see today. And we can get into that later if you choose. But after the 8 years of Congress, President Trump appointed me to serve 2 years in Health and Human Services, which is appropriate for a physician. But then he put me in charge of the Economic Development Administration, required Senate confirmation, and did that. And we, I think, did a lot of good things while there. But in the final year of his presidency, he appointed me to lead the staff in the White House as Deputy Chief of Staff, working with Mark Meadows and Jared Kushner. And I served the last year of the Trump administration in that position. So I've had, I think, a pretty in-depth background in both private sector and in the public sector, and have really enjoyed every bit of it. But there are many challenges that I've had to deal with then, and there are many challenges coming before us now.
There really are. You kind of look at the news and it's staggering. You're just like, I'm sure maybe you feel like, where do we even start?
John, that's so true, Danielle, and it's like touching on what you said a minute ago, John, about 2008 and how things have seem to have gotten progressively more troubling since then. What would you say is the difference, or if you could give some insight into the difference when you look at the country now, sort of from a cultural perspective? And I know that's not principally why you're on today, but it really jogged me because you served in Congress, you saw what was going on then. How has it changed between 2008 and today?
Well, you may recall that part of the debate in those days is whether or not we should legalize marriage on a same sex basis. And of course, the Supreme Court came down and said that people who are of the same sex should be allowed to marry. And that has, barring any laws that may come our way otherwise, that's now the law of the land. We don't even think about it today. But yet we're faced with other bigger challenges, which is that a person who's actually biologically male can actually compete against females, which really turns Title IX upside down, was to advance athletics among women. Women now are having to compete against biological males. And so that leaves a big question as to the fairness of that. Are we discouraging women now to compete in athletics? So, and then of course, we've come upon something that I'd never even heard of, but had been going on quite some time, and that is this whole idea of CRT and wokeness that has been inculcated into our educational system for years. And I only learned about it in the last year of the Trump administration when I was in the White House, where we're turning the whole idea of racism upside down to say that if you're born in a certain race, that you're automatically racist against all other races. These are things that we never even contemplated back in 2009 when I entered Congress. So I would say that we've gone really away as a nation and really as a Western civilization. We've gone far awry from where we were only 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah. And I'll say, John, in response, well, first of all, I agree with you on those points. I give credit to our legislature here in Louisiana for responding to those cultural threats by, passing legislation prohibiting biological men from competing against women in sports, and trying very diligently to get some anti-CRT measures passed, unfortunately, due to some Republicans in the legislature many of whom are no longer there now as a result of this recent election, have been unable to pass good, strong anti-CRT legislation. But I really believe that this coming session, we're going to get it done. I think our legislature is very attuned to the issues that you just raised and will respond accordingly. And so I'm very, very hopeful about that, the upcoming session.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yes, there was a lot of legislation that got bottled up under the prior governor, a Democrat governor, John Bel Edwards, that I think will easily pass through and be signed into law under Jeff Landry. So we're very excited about the possibilities with a new, very strong conservative supermajority in the legislature, as well as a strong conservative in the governor's mansion.
We are too. And tell us, what made you decide to run for treasurer?
Well, first of all, I love public service. When I ran for Congress, wasn't so sure that I would enjoy it or like it. But remember that at my core is the need to help people. That's what I love about being a doctor. Is it's an opportunity to help people. I'll just give you an example. Only 2 nights ago, my wife and I took some friends out to dinner that we've gotten to know over the years. And one of them began to choke on a piece of meat. And I found myself having to do the Heimlich maneuver, which was successful, thank goodness, thank the Lord. A second time I've had to do that. And so I was glad that I had the skill and the knowledge to be in the right place at the right time to save a human life of someone that I value quite highly as a friend. And so, I feel that God has given me certain critical skills to do good things for people, to help people. Because, the Bible says that if you love the Lord, you must also love people as well. That's how you serve the Lord, is by serving people. So, in loving my fellow humans and mankind in general, I've had the opportunity to do that as a physician on a one-on-one basis. But if I serve as a public servant, I can serve and help many more people simultaneously in that position. So, for that reason, I love to serve in public office, and I knew that the treasurer's office was going to be an open office, and it certainly fits my skill set, at least on the financial side of my skill set. So I was very eager and anxious to make a run, and we had a very successful campaign. And as a result, as you know, we won by a large margin in November.
Yeah, we're super happy for that as well. And maybe for our listeners, what are the duties of the Louisiana State Treasurer, and what are your priorities going to be?
Well, there are three basic responsibilities of the Louisiana State Treasurer. Number one, of course, is to manage the funds that come in via taxpayers, federal funds that come in. You can't just put money in an account these days because it actually loses value while it sits in an account. So you have to make sure you're getting a certain return on investment that will overcome, the negative pull that occurs with inflation. So that's very important. Number two, there's something called unclaimed property, where for whatever reason money gets lost. It may be inherited money that has not made it to its heirs. It could be tax refunds. There are any number of ways that money can end up under state control that actually belongs to people. And in unclaimed property, our job is to make sure it gets to its rightful owners. And it's a very popular program, as you can imagine, and one that I think is very important because there have been legislatures and governors who have pilfered the unclaimed property in the past. So I view as my job is to protect the citizens, to be sure that it's only given to the rightful owners. And then finally, the treasurer is the chairman of the bond commission that oversees the bonding of projects by municipalities, parishes and cities. So it's very important because certainly you wouldn't want any of these municipalities to be unable to service the debt that they get into. So there's an approval process. It's not 100% under the control of the treasurer, but the treasurer, as chairman of the bond commission, has a very important role in all of that.
Speaking of public funds, John, late in 2022, I think October or November of 2022, your predecessor, John Schroeder, divested close to $1 billion of taxpayer pension funds from BlackRock, which is an investment firm that promotes something called environmental social governance in its investment criteria. Can you explain to the listeners, talk a little bit about this investment criteria, environmental social governance, and do you agree with former Treasurer Schroeder's decision to divest state pension funds from them?
Well, first of all, let me just say, Chris, I do agree with what John Schroeder did, the current, soon-to-be former treasurer, and so to explain to your listeners what ESG really is. BlackRock and Vanguard and Schwab, all of these companies, their purpose, their primary purpose, is to take investor money that's entrusted to them and to invest it wisely with a maximum return balanced against risk. So you can determine for yourself as an investor how much risk you want to take. Maybe you want to put money in bonds, which have almost no risk, but you get lower return, or you may want to put it in the stock market where there's more risk, but perhaps a higher potential return. But traditionally, that has been their sole criteria is return on investment based on your tolerance as an investor of risk. But now all of a sudden, we have this ESG idea, which is to say, well, it's not just about return on investment, it's also about political and social outcomes that we think the money should be put in places that maybe have two different goals. One being, again, we get some social outcomes that we prefer, meaning BlackRock and Vanguard and those. And hopefully along the way, you get improved return on investment. Well, the University of Chicago actually did a study of 20,000 Morningstar rated funds, and they compared those that were invested for, again, dual purposes, return on investment and ESG, and those that were purely for the purpose of return on investment. And what they found was the best ESG invested funds did worse than the worst performing non ESG funds. So the point of all of this is anytime you distract from the primary purpose and goal of what you're trying to do, and in this case, get the best return on investment, you're going to get lesser outcomes. And we're seeing this in corporate America. I mean, of course, Bud Light is probably the best example, and Target being the second best example, where marketing was done in a way that was completely in conflict with really the consumers of those products. And as a result, there's been a free fall in the revenue and the valuation of the Budweiser Corporation that provides that beer, and they're trying to turn it around, but it continues to fall in market share. And if I were an investor in that company, I would be very unhappy with them. But again, they took the risk. They went out there and they tried to serve a different purpose than to provide the best product at the best price to continue the dominance in the market. And now they have lost that dominance. That's just one example. And what's driving that, and I'll end with this, is that there are actually organizations out there that rate CEOs and CFOs, people who lead these companies, actually rate them personally in how they run their companies to be more CRT friendly and more woke, like more socially progressive or liberal, if you will, and that somehow that's valued for them in the marketplace when it comes to getting promotions or perhaps getting an even better job at a higher pay. So it's all kind of a vanity thing that's being driven by this extreme liberal movement that we have in this country. And what it's doing is destroying markets and destroying products. And the American people are losing faith in it. And so I just think that, look, what I do as a personal investor is up to me, and the same with you. But if I'm going to invest money for other people, in this case, the taxpayers, I feel I have a duty and responsibility to invest that wisely and safely and not to allow any sort of other consideration but for, of course, the return on investment.
Yeah, and that's so good to hear you say that the primary purpose of investing is to maximize the return on the investment, and these extracurricular considerations not only are not good from a practical point of view insofar as the return, but according to John Schroeder, are a fundamental threat ultimately to our freedom and liberty and our ability to control our own economic lives.
Yeah, that's for sure. And look, we have disasters even going back to the Obama administration. Remember that President Obama wanted to compete on solar panel manufacturing with China. So he took about $530 million and loaned it to a new upstart company called Solyndra. And that company lasted only months. It collapsed. All the money went by the wayside and found its way into pockets of wealthy people and political allies. And so, if anything was a poster child for why we shouldn't do these crazy things with investments, that should have been. But yet, here we are years later, seeing disaster after disaster. And then, of course, and this is a slightly different subject, but you have our current president, Biden, who's putting now billions and billions and billions of dollars into EV vehicles and things like that, when consumers out there just don't want them. They're not a good value in the view of consumers. So we've gone from bad to worse when it comes to all of these irrational investments of mainly government money, and it's a waste of taxpayer money. And I think I have a duty and responsibility to the taxpayers of Louisiana is to make sure their money is well spent and wisely spent and properly invested.
Well, thank you for that. And absolutely agree with you. I think that if people want if people want to invest in things that are ideologically driven, they have the right to do that on their own. But it shouldn't your hand shouldn't be tied to whether you should do that or not. And I was thinking about my time as a traditional corporate employee. I had no say whatsoever in what investment firm my retirement money was put in. And it's infuriating to know that you basically, okay, you can choose the funds within the company, but if the company's whole motion is in this direction of ESG and net zero carbon investing, your hands are tied with your own money. How can the people of Louisiana who are not state employees be protected against investments in ESG and net zero investing? Should they have the ability to opt out?
Well, good question, Danielle. If it's your own personal money, you can, of course, go to any brokerage that you want to do that. However, uh, in the case of, say, a 401k, your retirement funds, you're right. The company may choose to do business with, again, one of these companies, and the funds offered within that may, in some cases, be ESG invested funds. So I would just say, scrutinize and give feedback to your employer because your employer may want to make those changes if they know. In many cases, they really don't know. So you need to be engaged with these things, that's for sure.
It's true. Some of us have worked for woke corporations, and they turn a deaf ear to this stuff and are doing it absolutely on purpose. But for those companies who may just not be aware, that's absolutely a good route for people to take. Especially, I was thinking, as Chris and I were kind of talking this through this morning, we were talking about this whole ESG movement, the net zero lobby. The entire point of it is the destruction of the coal industry and the oil and gas industries. And why would any sane person, particularly in the state of Louisiana, want to invest in a way that aims to destroy the industry that they're a part of, the industry that they may have their business in? It's just completely crazy to me.
Well, it is. And let me just say that what we observe of the extreme left, and this is being driven by the extreme left, is their goal is chaos in the Western culture. Because you go, why would you want to destroy something that so many people depend on and it serves so many people? But the only answer we can come up with when we analyze this is that it's not for any real benefit, but to create chaos, which then means that you, as a citizen, you're going to seek out safety and protection. And where are you going to go for that? You're going to go to government, which means government takes more control of your personal day to day life. And they see that as a good thing. I see it as a bad thing. I just got to tell you that the improvements that we have had in our carbon emissions, and again, we could debate whether there's any need to do that at all. But going past that, we have reduced carbon emissions and we've done it very well, but we've done it using natural gas, which is a very clean form of energy. And so we're actually achieving goals that others say we should achieve, by using carbon-based fuels in order to do that. And there are other ways we can do it. We could use more of the nuclear power. Nuclear is clean. It's cleaner really than anything else, and it doesn't kill birds and all that. We know how to handle nuclear material. And so, if you really want to go to a net carbon zero future, there are many ways to do that if you see that as a value. But you don't have to destroy the oil and gas industry, and you don't have to try to rely on solar panels or wind, because those forms of energy, unfortunately, have not advanced in technology far beyond where they were 100 or 200 years ago. So the only answer we can come up with as to why the extreme left is doing this is simply that it creates chaos and more dependence on government, which is ultimately what they want to do. I honestly think they care less about the environment and more about government control of our lives.
You're
Yeah.
so right. I was just listening to something the other day where they were talking about the COP20 and how when did the conversation stop being about pollution? Because everyone can get on board with clean air. This is long since stopped being about pollution and has been some ideologically driven, unproven, carbon based, goal that is completely unreachable.
Well, and again, look at the irony here. So you've got John Kerry, who's kind of the minister of net zero carbon emissions, and yet he's flying around the world leaving tons of carbon into the atmosphere by flying personal jets, and sees no problem with that whatsoever. So you have China that's building a coal-fired plant every week, one every week, and dumping tons of carbon and really other pollution into the air. But nobody seems to have anything to say about them or India, anybody else. The only Western country that's truly met the requirements of the Paris Accords on carbon emissions has been the U.S., and we've done it primarily by converting to natural gas as a primary energy form.
Yeah. It's interesting, John, when you talk about control and chaos, and I know you know history, and if you go back and look at how tyranny blossoms, it is because government creates and manufactures, often fabricates, quote unquote, emergencies that frighten people. In this case, climate emergencies, whether it has any foundation or not, and then attempts to provide the solution to the emergency. And the solution always involves a surrender of individual freedom, a surrender of our sovereignty and of our rights on the altar of government. I couldn't agree with you more, but it is certainly not without historical precedent.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems like the common denominator here is always more government control, less personal freedom and rights. And so, and you look at the people who are behind this, the political leaders like Biden and John Kerry, we've already talked about, but George Soros and people like that, they have a world vision that government can make you happier by controlling your life. And why they believe this, I have no idea, because, Americans love their personal freedoms and civil liberties. And yet it's like a constant fight that we're seeing the erosion of these things. And we have to constantly be vigilant against governments taking our rights away from us. And we're seeing it even on the state level. I mean, the atrocities that are coming out of states like California and New York are just unbelievable, which is why people are beating a path away from those states and to the southeast.
Yes. And that's why it's so important, because of all of the federal and even international overreach that we're seeing. It's so important that our state legislatures are strong and are acutely aware of the importance of of state sovereignty and individual freedom. And John, as you know, under the Constitution, the Ninth and 10th Amendments, the state legislatures have been vested by the founders with the right to reject federal overreach and to assert state sovereignty. And I think that's what legislatures across the country are beginning to do. Certainly ours is beginning to do that, because I think that they are aware of this just constant effort on the part of the federal government to overreach and to erode our freedoms. And so a lot of the answer is going to lie right here in our state legislature.
Yes, and there are issues that are basically there already. And I'll just give you one example. There are banks that are debanking or deplatforming various businesses and individuals because they disagree with them ideologically and politically. Second Amendment. It is very difficult for those who sell and trade firearms legally to find banks that will allow them to do business with them. I've been told that this is happening in the oil and gas industry as well, that they're having to figure out ways of getting financing for their projects, not because there's any sort of limitation on the return on investment or paying back the loans, is simply because these banks don't like what they do. And as a result, even though they're legal businesses, and so I think that's something that we're going to have to deal with in our state, to say, look, if you're going to be providing banking services or insurance in our state, if you're going to have a charter, you're going to have to be fair and even with everyone who needs your services, not pick and choose who you want as customers. And then, of course, there's the central bank digital currency that the platform has already been, or the framework, I think is a better term to use, has already been created by the Biden administration going back to September of last year, that digitizes our currency and puts lots of transparency into your day-to-day transactions from the federal government. And is that a wise thing to do? And again, this is not cryptocurrency. This is actually something completely different. It's a government control of our economic activities. And that's the reason why we got to be very careful about the 82,000 new IRS agents that they're trying to hire, because they need those eyes to look down these new forms of oversight that the Biden administration has in mind.
Absolutely. And the Biden administration, as you know, John, continues to push Congress to try to adopt statutorily CBDC as for the country. Now, Congress has rejected those efforts to date, but it is this central bank digital currency seems to be yet another way for the government to regulate, surveil, and control our lives.
Right. Again, the tie that binds all this together is more government control of your life. And there are honestly people who believe that they would have less stress and do better off in life if government just tells them where to go, where to get their groceries, their automobiles, whatever services and everything they need. They really want to give this up. And they think, however, that all humans should give up to a centralized government, with the belief that you put smart people in charge and they can make your personal decisions better than you can. And I just think that's crazy. I just do not believe that that's what this country was founded on in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it's just the opposite. And it even goes back to healthcare, that the government should determine what healthcare you should get and when that should end. So we're at a critical time, I think, in history where we have to decide who we are as a Western civilization, not just as a nation. And that is, are we going to preserve our personal freedoms and our ability to choose for ourselves and our families, or are we going to give it up to the government? And that's what all of these things are about.
They are. And you mentioned cryptocurrencies, and thinking about the way forward for our nation. I was thinking this morning about how great it would be if the government got out of the business of printing money altogether. In my view, the government's been spending money with abandon. They seem to just be bent on devaluing our currency with no intentions of stopping. You take a look at the BRIC countries, and see that they're moving away from the petrodollar altogether. So the US dollar may not even continue to be the world's reserve currency for much longer. Do you see a role for cryptocurrencies, specifically Bitcoin, as legal tender? And does Louisiana have the authority to make Bitcoin legal tender if it's not done at the federal level?
Well, I think for cryptocurrencies to survive, they have to be accepted by the world governments, not just state governments. It has to be, and not even our federal government, because again, we're a worldwide economy. We buy things. I mean, you might order something on Amazon and it may be delivered from another country. So we need to have the ability to cross various state and federal and worldwide borders when it comes to financial transactions. I'm not specifically opposed to cryptocurrency in any way. I don't invest in it because honestly, as Warren Buffett says, you shouldn't invest in something you don't understand. And as much as I've read about it, I still feel like that I don't understand enough about cryptocurrency to see it as a investment. Now, as far as it being a currency, I certainly see the potential there, but we need a heck of a lot more regulation. And I'm a deregulation guy, but you see what happened with FTX. This guy convinced people to invest in FTX cryptocurrency, and then he used it for his own purposes, investing it unwisely and losing money, giving it to politicians to have his favorite political views protected and pushed forward. So, for cryptocurrency to be useful or any digital currency, we're going to obviously have to really debate this both in our legislatures and as well as Congress.
John, so much of what we're talking about here, particularly these financial issues, the ESG, the CBDC, are ripe. They seem to be ripe for legislative action in our state. We certainly are talking with legislators who seem eager to put forward some legislation to protect Louisiana citizens from this nefarious overreach. How involved do you intend to be on these issues as they pertain to your office in the upcoming session? And do you intend to be present at any point during the session and to make your voice heard down there?
First of all, as you know, the treasurer has no legal authority over the budget process. There's no vote whatsoever. However, I'm personal friends with a number of members of the legislature, have worked for them, known them for years. You may be aware that I was one of the 9 founders of the House Freedom Caucus.
I was. That was one of the things actually that I found when we were researching the candidates in the treasurer's race. And I read that about you and I was like, well, that is quite a mark in your favor. You found a founder along with Jim Jordan, correct?
Jim Jordan, I had dinner with Jim and Mark Meadows last night, as a matter of fact. But yes, we were the 3, I guess the core, if you will, the nidus. And then we added others in as founders. Ron DeSantis is one of the co-founders as well. And what we did, just in a nutshell, to give you just a small idea of how this thing started, we were being called out by then John Boehner, who was he was a Speaker of the House, and if you opposed him or his policies, which far too often was going along with Nancy Pelosi, then he would retaliate against you. He would try to uproot you from your seat. He tried to flip my district to a Democrat district. He did many things. So we came together and said, look, we're going to work as a team to move our conference, our Republican conference, in a more conservative and consistent direction. And as a result of that, John Boehner ended up resigning and retiring, as you know. But ultimately, the Freedom Caucus came to the defense of President Trump when he was attacked with what turned out to be something made up by the Hillary Clinton campaign, but carried forward by the DOJ and the FBI. And it was the Freedom Caucus that stood next to President Trump to get to the bottom of it and find that it was all made up, and the attack on the president. Well, since then, the Freedom Caucus has done a number of other good things, but one of them very recently is it's been expanded to 12 state legislatures, and Louisiana is the 12th one to join. So now we have the House Freedom Caucus in both the Senate and the House in our state legislature.
Very, 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 very favorable development on that front, and no question will wield significant influence in the upcoming session and beyond. Well, John, we really, really enjoyed having you on. It always seems like when we have really good guests, Danielle, that the time just goes by so fast.
It does.
You know, it really does, especially when we're listening to someone who truly is thoughtful, truly has thought about the issues that matter, as John has. Well, John, we certainly hope that you will make your voice heard on these critically important financial issues involving our sovereignty and our freedom that concern so many. We have no doubt you will. And it's just a great, great pleasure to have you on. Is there any final words that you would want to share with our listeners today about anything?
Well, first of all, Chris, Danielle, thank you so much for having me on today. It's been a pleasure. And what I would just like to say in summary is that with the election of 5 now Republicans statewide, and then a legislature that's not only Republican but conservative and a supermajority, and a governor who is conservative, that we've really aligned all the stars for our state to finally move forward and begin to ascend once again, catching up with states around us that are doing so well. So we have lots of work to do, and I'm just very excited to be part of a new conservative team that we've never had in Baton Rouge, working for the people of Louisiana. And so I'm very thankful to the Lord that finally this has been completed. And really, if we fail at this point, it's on us. I mean, we can't blame anybody. We can't blame Democrats. We can't blame liberals. We have the ability to make great things happen for Louisiana and make Louisiana, frankly, great again. And so I look forward to that opportunity. And thank you once again for having me on today.
Yes, indeed. And as one of the fine state senators we had on recently said exactly what you just said, everything is lined up. We have to get it done. And if we don't, indeed, it is on us. Thank you. Thank you so much, John, for joining us today. And God bless you, sir.
And God bless you, Chris, and Danielle as well. Take care.
Well, thank you. We look forward to having you back on. What a fantastic guest, and just a gift to the state. I mean, you can just sense he's definitely a doctor. He has the demeanor of a doctor. He has kind of I would say, kind of a gentle seeming approach. I bet he can be aggressive when he needs to, but I just appreciate his thoughtfulness, and he's clearly well read and steeped on the issues that we covered today, and I think far beyond the issues that we covered today as well.
Very much so, because of his background. He really has knowledge of things that go well beyond, his scope as treasurer, but he is very familiar with this CBDC, very familiar with this ESG, which are two massively important issues that really do need to be addressed legislatively. And just so glad to know that he has knowledge and background and understands the threat that they pose to us.
You took the words out of my mouth, because I think there are people who understand roughly what ESG and CBDC are, but they don't understand what's behind trying to implement these things. If you just read what Google tells you about CBDC, or if you read what Google tells you about ESG, it all seems like it's very positive, but there's very nefarious underpinnings, and there are really evil intent behind it, of stealing our personal liberties, stealing our autonomy, stealing really our privacy.
Yes, and we always have to remember, Danielle, that the ultimate objective is to control our lives, every facet of our lives. None of it is going to be optional if they have their way. CBDC is not going to be an optional deal. ESG is not going to be an optional deal. It's not going to be left to the freedom of the citizen to make these determinations. It is going to be imposed upon us by government elites who want to control our lives. And every time we look at things like this, we've always got to approach it through that prism, because that is their ultimate goal. Government wants to seize power from us, and once they seize our freedom, they're never going to give it back voluntarily. And I think Dr. Fleming understands that, and it is so comforting to have someone as treasurer who has that perspective.
Yes, and he's just going to be such a voice of wisdom and insight I think, to the entire administration, and it sounds like the legislature as well. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing him be, I guess, inaugurated in the coming weeks, and I'm ready to see Louisiana take off.
As am I, and I am also enjoying seeing the state of freedom take off across the state as we expand rapidly and with a broader and broader voice for freedom and constitutional conservatism. And I always take pride and joy in thanking our listeners and our supporters to the state of freedom, because we simply couldn't be doing it. We're approaching our 100th episode and growing by leaps and bounds, thanks to all of our supporters.
Yes, absolutely. So please do keep sharing the episodes that are really meaningful to you. Please share them with friends that you might think may be interested as well. We'd love to continue getting the word out and touching as many ears as we possibly can. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can do that at freedomstate.us, or send a check to P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. And the same for LeCag. We have been working hard for you as LeCag this entire election cycle, and we're gearing up for some pretty intense lobbying days ahead. Chris, how can people support LeCag?
Send checks to P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana 70896. Also, lacag.org to join as member or simply to make a donation. Danielle, we are revolutionizing the way political advocacy is done in Louisiana, and we are so thankful to be part of this what is really a revolution for freedom and liberty in our state. And we are only just beginning, and I just cannot wait to see what the weeks and months and years to come will bring us.
Yes, and with John Fleming as our guest today, I would be remiss if I did not share that an opportunity for listeners who may be interested in investing in precious metals, or even starting a home-based business in precious metals. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, which is actual dealer cost, and they are beating the big sites and have no credit card fees and no minimums. You can refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income as well. If you're just interested in purchasing metals, you can visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. And if you're interested in learning about the business aspect, email me directly at Danielle@freedomstate.us. I think the time is ripe. We've seen gold surging, and with the way that our currency is being devalued, it's smart for us to think about being diversified.
Now, indeed, is the time. No question about that. Well, Danielle, thank you for being with me today. It is always a pleasure to know that each day, with God's grace and the continued support of our listeners, subscribers, and donors, each day we are taking another grand step to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Amen. Have a great one, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.